are talking The Rig. This is a 6-episode kind of mini-series that stars Iain Glen, who you may know from Game of Thrones, where he played Ser Jorah Mormont. In fact, there's a number of actors here that you will recognise from Game of Thrones. It is somewhat of a reunion. And this is kind of a paranormal horror mystery thriller which has elements of The Thing, The Mist, kind of Resident Evil, along with a kind of ecological message as well. So what is the story? Well, it focuses on an oil drilling platform in the North Sea. And it's an older platform, and we have the crew there, which is led up by Iain Glen's character, Magnus. And there seems to be some type of unusual kind of tremors that are kind of going on, and it's causing some concern. But what's more concerning is this kind of large, thick fog, which seems to be enveloping this oil rig, and has some ill effects, you might say. But then we kind of get almost like a deepening kind of problems for our crew when we learn what the cause is, and there may well be other kind of antagonistic forces as well. So it's kind of like without kind of giving anything too much away here, it's essentially a somewhat of a kind of paranormal entity is the vaguest kind of way I would describe it, but I won't kind of go into what it is. But there is some kind of like scientific kind of theories that will that it kind of borrows from, shall we say. So this kind of plays a little bit like a novel adaptation, although I don't believe it is. What can we say that works in this kind of this series, this mini-series? So I think the idea of a horror sort of set on an oil rig is quite an intriguing one, because you really don't have anywhere to go. And there's been a number of kind of horror movies that have been set on oil rigs, this one obviously being a series. So it definitely gives you this kind of feeling of being trapped, because you only have so many places you can possibly go. Not only that, you have dwindling kind of food supplies, fresh water, stuff like that, and in this particular instance the kind of communications are down as well. So there's a real kind of sense of genuine kind of threat and danger that this kind of like the idea here kind of has in multiple different kind of facets. It's got quite a large cast, some of which whom I think do a pretty good job here. In particular, I think Iain Glen is a stand here. There's one or two other characters, including like the medic, for example, who I thought the acting was pretty strong. And the idea here is intriguing. Again, I'm not going to go through what exactly that is, but there is, there's a number of different kind of like ideas where it seems like it's kind of going, and when it kind of settles on, has some kind of like basis in science. Let me just kind of say that, but it is something unseen, let me just say. So, I kind of quite like the idea here, and people having to kind of pull together, think of kind of like ways to kind of solve kind of different problems that arise in the, in the kind of this sort of mini-series here, and what they're kind of going to do to fix it. Some of which admittedly does feel like they're spinning the wheels. We'll come on to that, but I still kind of quite like, the idea here of this group of people having to kind of pull together and find innovative ways to maybe to overcome a kind of a particular kind of problem here. There's also a kind of a larger mythology at play here as well. Consequences, I think, for this series, you can kind of see happening in the larger world, and in this story, what would happen not just to this oil rig crew, but maybe kind of like folks outside of that as well, which I all quite enjoyed. What doesn't work, so one quick thing really that didn't really bother me, but I feel I'd be amiss for not mentioning it. A lot of the kind of the external shots of this kind of oil rig in the sea are done via CGI. And I have to say the CGI isn't particularly strong. It kind of looks like early 2000s kind of CGI with like, the kind of the, when we have the kind of the camera panning around the kind of the oil rig and the kind of the water crashing up. It doesn't look particularly strong. In actual fact, I think it looks quite weak, I would go as far as to say. It looks like it's been relatively kind of quickly kind of put together. So Amazon, have put some decent money up for their various kind of like series and stuff, but maybe this one, the budget simply wasn't there, because the CGI does look particularly kind of ropey, and pretty much all the time. I wouldn't believe there's one instance where I think the CGI was all that good. There you go. I've mentioned I quite like some of the performance here, but equally I think there's some quite weak performances as well. I'm not going to point out actors who I think are necessarily the weaker performance, but you know, this has quite an ensemble cast. It's a large cast, so we have a variety in acting. Some I think are very strong, but there are others certainly at the other end of the scale there as well. So we do get a real mixed bag in regards to kind of some of the acting here. And I have to say some of the dialogue as well is a little bit kind of like ham-fisted. Some of it seems somewhat kind of unnatural, that people wouldn't really kind of say things like this. People tend to go in somewhat of a monologue kind of style, kind of way of speaking in certain instances. So when I was watching this, I kind of watched the first 2 episodes and I thought it was pretty strong. And I actually recommended it to someone. I said, oh, you should check out the rig. I've watched the first 2 episodes. It's pretty good. And then the other 4 episodes, I have to say, I felt took a dip in quality. Because although I think the setup for this series is pretty strong, which is ultimately the kind of the first 2 episodes, you know, setting up this kind of intriguing mystery, you don't quite know what's kind of going on. The remaining 4, certainly the next 3, really feel like it's stodgy. It's kind of spinning its wheels. It doesn't really kind of know where to go. And the final episode has tried to kind of piece everything together, and certainly I feel like it's trying to cram too much information in that final episode. So I really enjoyed the first 2. The next 3 I felt were a little bit kind of stodgy and dull, to be honest with you. I didn't really feel like it was just kind of throwing up kind of problems. Now we've got to deal with the kind of like this fire that's gone out on things, and we've got to reignite it. So it's kind of giving you these extra kind of problems to ultimately kind of pad out the running time. I suspect this could have been a film rather than a mini series, to be honest with you, because we do find there's a lot of kind of like excess material here that I didn't feel was particularly kind of interesting as well. And when it's kind of revealed about what this kind of paranormal threat is, I still don't, I don't think it was handled particularly kind of well. I think it just kind of like presents it to you and goes, yeah, well, there you go, And I thought, I don't know if it really does a good enough job here of setting up what it actually kind of is. And then we get the finale, where I feel it's quickly kind of set up, and you think, well, I didn't really feel that was particularly kind of satisfying. Now, I don't think this series is bad necessarily, but I gotta say, the first 2 episodes I thought were very strong. The later 4 were less interesting, unfortunately. Didn't quite live up to that kind of premise. I actually thought what they did with it here wasn't as interesting as I think it could have been, and then the execution seemed quite kind of like lackluster to me. Seemed quite kind of like somewhat spinning its wheels, as I kind of mentioned. And like I said, there are other problems here. The poor CGI, kind of mixed performances, some kind of hokey kind of dialogue here, some kind of like lots of kind of scientific sort of theories could have been thrown around, where I feel really the narrative wasn't particularly kind of strong on regard to that. So overall, it's an okay series. It starts off strong, but I think if you prepare that it's not going to be that particularly kind of strong all the way through, you may still kind of enjoy it. But it ultimately feels like a bit of a time waster, if I'm completely honest. It doesn't really feel particularly gripping. I don't think it's a series which is going to stay with anyone at the end of the time after kind of watching this. And I suspect they're trying to angle for a season 2. I don't know if that will happen. It's kind of annoying, I think, when series do this, rather than having like a definitive ending, to be honest with you, because I don't watch a lot of TV because so much of it gets cancelled. I simply can't be bothered to kind of get invested in something, so I rarely actually watch much in the way of TV unless it's a very big programme like kind of Game of Thrones or The Boys, which is going to have a proper kind of like conclusion because it's so big. But these kind of smaller shows, I'm always a little bit like, oh, do I want to bother watching it because I don't want to get invested in something for it just to go cancelled. So anyway, this series, I'll give it a 5 out of 10. A real mixed bag, to be honest. If you like a kind of ecological kind of horror thriller, you may want to check it out. I applaud having an ecological message, but it's not a super interesting series. 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.